Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk. If you have any questions during this presentation, you can enter them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we can answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Crop Talk for May the 15th. And as seeding's progressing throughout the province here, thought it'd be a good time to talk about soybeans, a crop that's been expanding over the last few years throughout the province, and thought it'd be a good time to get Dennis Lang on, who's our pulse specialist, and talk a little bit about some of the tips for planting the 2019 soybean crop. It seems like every year we run into different challenges, whether it's late, early, and this year maybe dry. And so I thought it'd be good for Dennis maybe just to go over a few points as we're getting into starting, and some guys maybe have just started in the western side of the province here, and just go over a few of the points for a few things to watch for. After that, I'll give a little bit of a crop update, and we'll go from there. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Dennis, and he'll start with his presentation.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me on here this morning. It's always quite interesting when you're putting these presentations together. It kind of gets you thinking again about some of the things that went right last year and some of the things that went wrong last year, and what we can do to make those changes. It was kind of interesting the other day. I was out seeding, and I just got off the tractor to hook up, and lo and behold, I looked down and I found my grandpa's old pipe wrench. So it was kind of interesting that after probably over 50 years on that field, nobody's ever discovered it. So I don't think it's usable anymore, as you can see here, but just kind of one of those interesting things. So the first question: should you be planting your soybeans on May the 15th? Simple answer: yes, if you've done everything else. We're going to go through some of the pros and cons to planting around this time, around the May 15th time period. But really, if you've done everything else, it is the time to be going. The forecast looks pretty decent over the next week, and the risk of frost now has kind of dissipated a little bit, because once we get into mid-May, time the beans are up, it'll probably be at least 2 weeks. So we should be, in most areas, we should be pretty close to missing that frost. So I'm going to start off. One of the first things when I talked to Lionel yesterday, just to finalize my presentation, he says, well, make sure you talk about nodulation. We always get these calls every year about, what kind of inoculant should we use on the field? Should we be using single inoculant? Should we be double inoculating? So those are some of your choices. We have liquid, peat, and granular formulations, and you can use combinations thereof. If you're a first-time soybean grower, using a liquid on seed and granular in furrow is probably the best way to go, because it gives you two different forms. If you don't have the ability to put granular on and you want to get more bacteria numbers, then you want to be going a combination of liquid and peat. That way it allows you to make sure you're going to have the proper bacteria in the soil. The bacteria that works on soybeans are not the same as the bacteria that works on peas, and it's not naturally found in Manitoba soils. So it is something that's very important to make sure that you do use the right strain, and if you are a first-time grower to soybeans, making sure that you're double inoculating. The one thing that's really kind of interesting is soybeans do need between 150 to 200 pounds of nitrogen to produce a 30 bushel per acre crop. So if you're having nodulation failure, somehow that plant's going to have to get nitrogen. This happened a number of years ago to a producer where he was a first-time producer, picked up a soybean seed, and it was all treated, ready to go. He'd never seen soybeans on this piece of ground before, and he had about 50 pounds of residual N. So he planted his beans, and then a week later, the seed dealer called him and said, "Oh, by the way, are you going to pick up your inoculant?" And he's like, "Oh no, we have no bacteria in the soil. What are we going to do?" So his first thought was to, based on what I mentioned earlier, that you need at least 150 pounds to 200 pounds of nitrogen to produce a 30 bushel crop, he thought, oh, let's go put 100 pounds of nitrogen right on just before emergence. Then he called us, and we did a little bit of experimenting on this field and did some randomized replicated trial. And what we ended up doing was we ended up putting on 50 pounds of urea broadcast at flowering and at early pod fill, and we also did a 100-pound rate of urea at that same time. All the timings were timed right around the rainfall, so that we got a rain shortly after, so it allowed that urea to go into the soil. And what we found was that where the farmer put 100 pounds of nitrogen on right at emergence, his yield was 31.5 bushels an acre. Where they put it on at early pod fill, or actually where we had put no nitrogen on whatsoever, we had 31.4 bushels an acre. So pretty much the same yield. It just doesn't put it into the yield when you put it on so early. Where we put it on at early flowering, there we were able to get it up to 33.7 bushels per acre. Same as a 100-pound rate. And you can see here by these letters behind that those are statistically the same as not doing anything at all. Where we put it on early pod fill, 39 bushels an acre, that was statistically different, as well as the 100-pound rate was also statistically higher than the check, but not the same as adding any more than the 50-pound rate. So we use this as kind of our rescue treatment. So if you are a first-time grower and you start checking in that third trifoliate for nodules and you're not finding anything, you want to wait as long as possible to see and wait to that early pod fill stage before applying any rescue treatment. It just goes to show you that they will still yield, but you're not going to reach their maximum potential if you don't have good nodulation. So the next question is, we've been growing soybeans for a number of years on some fields. Should I still be double inoculating, or can I get away with single inoculation? So this is from the Manitoba Pulse Growers On-Farm Network. These results are from fields, 25 trials, where they have at least a 2-year history of soybeans on the field. What they found here, the yield differences, only 2 of the 25 trials, or 8% of the chance by double inoculating, is where you saw a bit of a yield increase. So they're already seeing some benefits to all the years that we've been growing soybeans. With that, if you actually want to determine if you've had, whether or not you should be double inoculating any further, the Manitoba Pulse Growers also have a soybean fertility fact sheet that you can find at their website. There's a couple of things just want to point out. If you have a field with little or no history of soybeans, double inoculation, so liquid on seed, granular in furrow, is the way to go. If, however, you have a bit of history, what I would suggest is work through this checklist and see whether or not you qualify, or whether you think your field will qualify for single inoculation. So first one is, has the field had at least 2 previous crops of soybeans? If there's a check mark there, you're on your way. Was a previous soybean crops very well nodulated? If they have been, then you have a check mark there. Has the most recent crop of soybeans been within the last 4 years? If it has been, you have a check mark there. And have you had any significant flooding or drought? And if there's a check mark there, then all 4 criteria have been met, and then you're on your way to just using a single inoculate on the seed. Moving on from inoculation and the bacteria, what about seeding dates? I mentioned earlier, May 15th, I've been talking to a lot of different growers and growers that have been finishing up some of their cereals here last week and now getting into the soybeans. According to crop insurance, this is data that's collected on the seeding date from 2005 to 2013. You can see here along the bottom, the seeding dates, it's week and month. So between that 2nd and 3rd week, you're still above the 100% average yield. So that's typically when you start seeing growers start to plant. Once you get into the 4th and then the 1st week of June, that typically drops off on this red line here for soybeans. So we're kind of in that magic range right now where the best yields are kind of there. But there's a few other things to be considered as well. One of those is minimum soil temperatures, and I know Lionel has put up this table many times in his presentation. And And you can see here that soybeans need at least 10 degrees Celsius to get them off to the races, whereas other crops like canola and wheat and oats are a lot cooler. They can germinate a lot cooler crops. So the benefit of the warmer soil temperatures is those beans just don't stay in the ground quite as long. And if they don't stay in the ground quite as long and they're up, they're generally a lot more healthier. The next thing I kind of want to touch on here is seeding rates and plant establishment. So there's two things that growers need to kind of be reminded of, is that know what your target is for your final target stand, what you're looking for. Typically, that usually ends up between 140 and 170,000 plants per acre. That's kind of the range. That's what you want to have about a month after planting. But in order to get that, you need to plant more plants because you have, things like seed survivability. If you have some cold soil, if you have some dry seed, if the germination's maybe not as strong as some other years that you've had. So typically, if you're planting in a solid seeded situation, like 15-inch or less, you want to be targeting to plant 200,000 seeds per acre, so that when factoring mortality, you're going to end up somewhere in that 140 to 170 range. If you're using a planter, for example, in a 30-inch row spacing, you might want to be able to drop, or you should be able to drop that to about 180,000 and still end up in that magic range. So you always want to, be aware of your germination. What some growers have done as well, if they have some dry seed and they're concerned that their air seeder might bang up that seed a bit more, what you can do is actually take 100 seeds and soak them in a small little flat of water with about 1 inch submerged for about 5 minutes, and look at the seed to see if that seed coat is starting to separate. If it looks like it's starting to come off, count that as a damaged seed. If you're under 10% of those of the entire sample, then you're good. If you're 15, 20%, then you're going to have to start increasing your seeding rate to compensate for that. Because what has happened in the past, where growers have had dry seed lots, put it through the air seeder, had their fan speed crank way up, not realizing that it was doing damage, and then they end up with a stand of 80,000 plants, and they ended up planting 200,000 seeds. So in that situation, you still have a fighting chance to get a good crop if you're growing a Roundup Ready variety, because you can spray it multiple times to keep those weeds under control. But those types of things, it doesn't give a person a very good feeling to plant 200,000 seeds and only end up with 80,000 plants emerge, and they have to look at it for the entire season. So really, it's just to pay attention to the dry seed and the germination, and making sure that all things are correct. Typically, seeding depth, we get this question every year. More so, we get it on dry years. Is how deep can we go? Typically, 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches is kind of what the recommended rate is. We've had growers go down to 2 inches. They will come up from 2 inches, but really, you're gonna see a lot slower emergence. And typically, if the soil temperatures are cooler, they're gonna stay down in there a little longer. So the recommendation on dry year is only go as deep as you need to reach that moisture. So if you got moisture at that 1.5 or 1.75 range, don't go any deeper than that. Typically, you still want to be in that magic range of 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches. The one thing you don't want to do is plant too shallow either. Sometimes there's a temptation from growers to say, well, they're calling for some good rain, so I'll plant it, 1/2 inch, and it'll be out of the ground much faster. What can happen there is, if you don't end up getting that rain, then the seed may just have enough moisture to imbibe and then eventually die off. So I've actually haven't seen it in a few years, but we have had it happen where growers did that and had to replant because they just didn't get the moisture and the seed just died off. Ideally, you want to see beans twice in 1 week. Once when you put them into the planter or air seeder, and once when they come out of the ground. The warmer the soil is, the quicker they come up. And right now, depending on where you're at, we're somewhere between 5 and 10 degrees. But there is a bit of a compromise. If you have a lot of acres to put in, sometimes you have to start a little earlier and to be able to get them in on time. So what I've been telling growers is that if you have, a couple thousand acres to plant, if you started here on Sunday or Monday of this past week, and that's going to take you possibly a good part of this week. By the time you're done, you're probably done by the May long weekend. If your soil temperatures are typically steady at 10 degrees Celsius, those beans take about 15 to 17 days to emerge. If the soil temperatures are above that, steady at 15 degrees Celsius, then they come up a lot quicker. One thing that has been discussed over the years is how important is the first 8 to 24 hours of that water temperature after you plant. Cold soil water, when you're below 8 degrees Celsius, causes the cotyledons and the embryo to be damaged, which can potentially affect the seedling vigor and have those seeds die off. Really cold soil water temperatures can cause germination failures and seeding death. A couple of slides here. This is from the MP Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers report back in 2014, taken from a North Star Genetics publication, where this first slide, they planted soybeans into soil that was 21 degrees and maintained that for 21 days. And you can see here a fairly even stand overall. Here, planting at 21 degrees Celsius, keeping that temperature there for 8 hours, and then the temperature dropped off for 4 days. You can see a lot of unevenness in the stand here. Now, typically these plants are going to be a little bit further behind. They still should make it, but you can see here the difference between slide A, where they're maintained at a warmer temperature, and slide B, where they end up cooler temperature. And here, the final one here, the soybeans were planted into soil that was at 7 degrees for 20 hours, and then warmed up to 21 degrees for 17 days. And you can see how it really affected the seedling vigor and germination. So again, it's one of those things that, we can really show in the lab. We don't see it as dramatic in the field, but really, if we were talking May 1st, this would be more of an issue than what it is on May 15th. And now things are warming up. So just something to keep in mind. Seed quality, always something to consider. You should always know your germination lot. If there's a problem with it, it's always best to know that ahead of time. Then you can compensate for that. We've had it happen in our trials where we get all our germinations sent to us by the companies that are putting varieties in. Last minute, there's a germination issue on a variety, so we have to make a decision whether to bump the seed or drop it. Same thing as a farmer. If you do have a problem with the germination, it's always best to verify that with your seed dealer when you pick up the seed to make sure there's no changes. Dry seed, as we mentioned before, can be a problem, and you just need to adjust your seeding rate accordingly if you do have a dry seed lot. Most of the seed last year, I think moisture was a little better last year than it has been in previous years, but it's always one of those things. You can always use your moisture tester too to see if your seed moisture is up around 11 to 12%. If it's above that, or anywhere in that from 11 to 14% range, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. Once you start dropping below 11%, then you can start to end up with a reduced stand because of that dry seed being damaged as you're seeding. The other thing I was going to touch on a little bit here is seed placement of phosphate. That's always a big question every year. Should we be putting phosphate with our soybeans? The research that Don Clayton has been doing, or all the studies that they've done over 28 site years, has kind of shown that no matter what rate of fertilizer they apply with the seed, that they haven't really seen a yield response by applying soybean or phosphate with soybeans. There are some, if you're looking to maintain what's in your soil, there are a few ways to kind of do it though. If you want to do it at seeding time, you can either, if you can sideband the phosphate, get it away from the seed. Some growers will drill it with the seed, but the recommendation is only about 20 pounds with the seed. So you have to be a little careful with that. And especially on the dry year, you may not want to do that on the dry soil year, because you can actually see that affect the plant stem. A better recommendation for managing phosphate in soybeans is not necessarily managing it in soybeans themselves, but manage it as a whole rotation. So knowing what your current P level is, if it's excessive, if it's in over 20 ppm, then you want to be able to draw it down, meaning that you're planting a crop, you may not need to apply phosphate that year to help bring it down if it's in that 30 ppm range. If you're in that kind of the 11 to 20 ppm range, then you want to maintain that. So doing that through fall banding, applying it at other crops, for example. If you're preloading, for example, if you're growing wheat the previous year, you may want to bump that phosphate level up in that wheat because wheat can take a lot more. And then the year of soybeans, you may want to cut back or not apply any at all. And if you're really low, that's when you need to start really looking at banding and long term. If you're in that 5 to 8 ppm range, you're going to have to look at managing that in a long-term rotation, and with fall banding and applying definitely in more phosphate in the cereals the previous year. The one thing that they have found in various studies that I've read is that soybeans seem to respond more to higher soil phosphate levels, so where the rotation has allowed the soil to be in that 11 or 10 to 20 ppm range. They've seen better yields there than if you have a low soil phosphate level in that 5 and you're just adding. So it's always good to kind of keep those things in mind. One thing to kind of always keep in mind when you're planting rotation, especially if you've picked up new fields and you're planting soybeans on it for the first time, always have a look at whether or not there's any residual herbicide carryover. Look at what was sprayed last year on the crop. If you've sprayed, if the crop had wheat on it last year and there was any Prestige or Curtail M or any of the products, the Lontrell-based products, you can end up with some problems in your soybeans this year. So always kind of keep those things in mind when you're moving forward. On dry years, it's going to be a lot more pronounced. I have actually seen a field that had Prestige put on it in year 1 on the wheat. The wheat straw was actually harvested off the field and used in the barn for bedding, and that bedding was actually eventually spread back on that field in the fall in strips, and you could actually see exactly where the Prestige was, or where the straw was, where they broadcast it and worked it in. It actually delayed the crop almost a week in that area and caused some deformed plants to show up. It was quite interesting to see that in the field. The one other question I've been getting in the last couple of days here with growers that have been seeding is, should I be rolling my soybeans? The biggest thing with rolling is you're trying to reduce the risk of having stones come in the combine, any dirt lumps, corn stalks, those types of things. That's the main purpose for rolling. Some growers like to roll the field just to make harvesting much easier, even although they don't have stones. One of the big challenges you have on a dry year, though, is that if you tend to pulverize that soil and you don't get any rain on it afterwards, we see a lot of soil moving around in various regions because that soil is fairly black once you've seeded your soybeans, and if it dries out and you get any kind of wind, significant wind, you start to see soil blowing. So in those situations, what I recommend to growers is look at rolling after the beans are up, in that anywhere from unifoliate to first trifoliate stage. It's something that typically you can do quite easily. So the growth stages that you're looking at for rolling is you want to see at least the entire crop be at the unifoliate stage. So you got these 2 big leaves on either side of the main stem here. I usually try to recommend for new growers, wait until you see the first trifoliate stage, meaning that once you have this grouping of first 3 leaves showing up and they're fully expanded, that way you're past the stage where you can cause any damage, and that stage would be the hook stage where they're starting to push through. And you don't want to be rolling at this stage because you're going to snap a lot of beans off. Just going to go back a slide here. One thing to really keep in mind, though, is that when you're rolling after the crop is up, you can't just roll on any day. You need to pick a day that's going to be 25 degrees Celsius. You want to be rolling in the mid-afternoon when everything's nice and warm. The plants are very pliable, because what can happen if you go out too early, you can actually start snapping plants off. And I've seen this happen with growers where it's warm at 10 in the morning. It's actually 23, 24 degrees. They go out and they start rolling, and they make a pass and they check, and all of a sudden they're saying, wow, there's lots of plants being broken off. In that situation, what's happened is, even though the air temperature is warmed up, the plants haven't really warmed up yet. So I typically recommend, if you're rolling, roll after lunch on a warm day, and pick your day. If today's not going to work, then maybe wait a few days. Ideally, I like to see growers roll after seeding, but sometimes you may get caught with a heavy rain that you can't roll right after seeding, or it's too dry and you have to wait a little bit and wait. But then if you have to wait because it's dry, I would wait until the crop is up, and you generally will have a week to 10 days in that time period to roll that crop. And with that, that's kind of the main things that I kind of wanted to talk about. Moving forward, pay attention to your seeding rate, making sure that you're checking to make sure you're not putting too much seed on. It's a common problem that some new growers have, is they keep going back and getting more seed all the time and can't figure out how many, why they're putting so much seed on. So it's always good to calibrate to make sure you're getting the proper rate of seed on that you're targeting. Sometimes if you're used to seeding wheat and soybeans, you're seeding at a lesser rate than what you'd be seeding wheat. And if you're seeding at the same rate, then you're going to be putting way too much seed on. I've seen years where growers have put upwards of 400,000 seeds per acre down down instead of their 200,000 seeds. That's just a waste of seed. It's not going to really give you any benefit. And it won't give you much of a detriment to it, but that's probably one of the biggest things is just making sure that you're getting the proper seeding rate down. If you're rolling, check for damage. As far as weed control, one thing I'll just mention with weed control, if you're doing any kind of spring burn off, really pay attention to the products that you're putting on. If there are some products, and I'll just use this as an example, there is Express Pro, Express SG, and Express FX. One of those three can be put on soybeans, the other two can't. And so it's always best to refer to the guide. And Express SG is actually the tribenuron, which is actually okay for pulses, but the other two are not. And so you can run into some real problems. So if you're doing some spring burn off to clean up some weeds, just really pay attention to the product that you're using to make sure that it is registered for the crop that you're putting on. Just don't make any assumptions. So with that kind of wraps up my talk today, and I open up for any questions that you may have.
Okay, Dennis, I actually got a couple here. One, I guess I'll start from this one first. When you were talking about rolling beans, what stage would it be too late to roll beans?
I would say the second trifoliate. I've seen some research where they go up to the third trifoliate, but really first to second would be as late as I want to go, because sometimes if you get a good year, those third trifoliate plants are getting quite big already. And really, the only reason that you would have to roll at the third trifoliate if it's been wet enough through that time period that you haven't been able to get on the field. Really, anywhere from unifoliate to up to second trifoliate would be the max, I would say.
Okay. Another one was older air seeder, and would doubling the liquid inoculant work instead of doing a liquid and a peat?
It would. You get more bacteria up as long as you're not making those the seeds too wet. The one mistake that some growers have is that, oh, we'll just add more liquid to it, and then if you end up, ideally, if you're inoculating yourself, what I find the best way to do it is inoculate your seed from truck 1 to truck 2, and then truck 2 goes to the field. Meaning that if you're a little on the wetter side with your inoculant, then by the time you actually put it into your air seeder, it's had a chance to dry a little bit, so it's not quite so sticky and it won't cause any bridging. If you're putting on extra liquid and you go liquid right into the air tank, you can end up with some bridging and cause some problems. Myself, I like to use a liquid peat. I have quite a history of growing soybeans on my farm. I like to use a combination of both, because I can visually see that it's being treated, and then I don't get the solution isn't isn't too wet, and the peat-based inoculants actually work quite well now. They're not like the old pea inoculants we used like 20 years ago that everything ended up in the drill box, at the bottom of the drill box. Now everything sticks quite nicely.
So do you put your liquid on then in the yard from one truck to the other, and then the peat as it's going into the air seeder?
I do both at the same time, actually. I sprinkle it in the auger, and the auger does a really nice mixing going in then. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's the same. The difference there is that's a double rate inoculant versus a double inoculant where you're going liquid on the seed and granular in the box, because those are two different forms. The advantage to using two different forms is that they're available at different times. So, for example, if it's a really wet spring, the granular inoculant might have a bit more of an advantage. If that on-seed inoculant washes away from the seed, the in-furrow is still there for later in the growing season.
Okay. And then back to your rescue treatment there when you got where the inoculation didn't work. Was that a dry or a liquid that was put on for your nitrogen?
That was we broadcast urea, so it was a dry product, and you definitely do not want to use a liquid. Again, you do not want to use a liquid. Again, you do not want to use a liquid. And the reason I say that 3 times is we had that happened again a couple years later to a grower where they had no nodulation, and they went and put a liquid on there, and I have never seen a crop get burnt that bad as I did in that field. With that liquid, it just burnt it. So the granular hits the ground. That's why it's you have to time it around a rainfall. So.
Okay, well that's good information to know too. Great. Lori, is there any other questions that might have come up?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, well, if you will, first of all, thanks, Dennis, for coming on today. That's good information for guys going out to the field right now. And if Lori, you'll turn the screen over to me, we'll continue on with Crop Talk for today. So start with a little bit of a crop update as to what's been happening province-wide, and then a little bit as what's been happening in the western side of the province here over the past week. Again, a cool week last week for most of Manitoba, and we've still seen a lot of the cereal crops going in, and right now we're probably in anywhere from 70 to 100% done the cereals throughout the province here. We did see some canola starting to go in on the weekend as things did warm up again, and we're probably in that range of 30 to 60% done in the province for canola, as well as some of the flax, soybeans, and sunflowers got started. The cooler, drier soils earlier this week did cause some people to turn to soybeans instead of planting canola, and I think the big scare there is that a lot of producers are concerned about flea beetle issues in planting canola and letting it sit in the ground too long. So I think that was one of the concerns. And I think Dennis maybe mentioned that some guys were planting soybeans into maybe a little bit cooler soil, and just maybe more comfortable doing it that way than going with canola. A little bit about our pasture and haylands throughout the province. And again, because of the cool, dry conditions, they're rating fair to poor right now, and basically because we just need some heat to get the grass growing, and where the frost have definitely had an effect on the alfalfa that's been trying to grow and been frozen off once and sometimes even 3 times already. Looking at the south or the western side of the province, again, have experienced very little to no rainfall. Cool conditions, have kept some producers out of the field. They had all their cereals in already, and they were waiting for some warmer temperatures. Last weekend, we did start getting some nicer temperatures. On Sunday, we were up into the 20s, and I know there was quite a few guys back out in the field putting canola in. Right now, when you look at the western side, we're probably about the 50% completed seeding on everything. And wheat and our cereal crops are about 80% done. Peas are done, and they just seem to be taking a little bit longer to emerge. We're getting some of the early seeded cereal crops starting to poke through the ground, but it seems like it's taking a little bit longer for some of the peas to get up, maybe because they're planted a little bit deeper. I've seen a few fields where they've germinated but just haven't poked through yet. We did get some producers planting some soybeans last week, and corn and both corn and silage corn are being planted. And right now, by Monday, Tuesday of this week, we were looking at about 25% of the acres being canola acres being in, and most of that happening kind of that Saturday through Monday, Tuesday range. So by the end of this week, I could see us having a fair bit of the crop in the western side of the province. Early seeded canola, early seeded cereals are emerging, and when you look, the emergence is actually coming up fairly good right now. We're seeing pretty uniform emergence. We're not seeing too many issues with compaction because it's been dry. So the crop is basically, when it was planted, was put into some decent moisture. The cool conditions when we were planting kind of aided the ability for the moisture to stay there. It wasn't drying up right to the seed, and so the crop was able to germinate and get going. Took a little longer in some cases, 25th of April, and this stuff is still just nicely poking through the ground. Winter wheat and fall rye, again, another crop that's showing a little bit of the effects of the cool conditions. It's growing and actually getting to the point where it's starting to tiller out. But some rainfall and some warm conditions will definitely help that crop fill in a lot of these empty spaces that we're seeing in the field. And I'm going to talk a little bit about winter wheat a little bit later on in my presentation here, just to talk a little bit about weed control. So where are we right now in comparison to previous years? Well, right now we're sitting at about 50% done this year. Last year we were about 55, and our 5-year average is about 51. So we're pretty much right on par. It did seem like we got off to an early start there, and we were getting a lot of the crop in, and it seems like we've by parking the drills for a couple days there, we probably just got ourselves back to the average. Again, just like to put this up on a weekly basis to show what we've been experiencing for rainfall, growing degree days, corn heat units, and our overall rainfall. And when you look at that, that's the real concern a lot of producers have right now is our percent of normal. In a lot of cases, we're under 10% of normal, and that's where I guess a lot of producers are hoping we're going to see some rainfall in the near future here. And got a couple maps here coming up, and it's showing some of the forecasted rainfall going through the states over the next 4 to 6 days here. And when you look at it, it looks like from the 16th to the 18th of May, we're looking at one system coming through and hitting kind of the southern part of the province. From the 18th to the 20th, maybe a little bit heavier, more of a system, and maybe getting its way a little bit farther up into maybe the central part of the province. But again, mainly hitting a lot of it hitting the majority of the rainfall hitting the southern part of the province again. And then when you look the total from the 15th to the 22nd, we're looking at the potential of I guess around an inch of rain, I guess is what they're forecasting is the potential. And I guess forecasts are just, that's what they are, is forecasts. Sure, it'd be nice if this one would come true. I think it would definitely help a lot of the crop get going and get that emergence off to a good start. A little bit about weed control in winter wheat. And as we're out there seeding, I just wanted to remind guys that have winter wheat in that the crop is growing. It is getting to the stage now where we're going to need to be looking at spraying for weeds. Even though the crop isn't tall, it still is adding leaves, it still is tillering. And before you select your product for weed control, you definitely need to get out in the field and scout it and stage the crop. The other thing too is with the dry, cool conditions, we've seen limited weed growth so far. And with that, you know, it's bought us some time here to really determine what we want to do for weed control. Another thing with winter wheat, a lot of times we count on winter wheat filling in these rows by this time of year, and hoping that by it doing that, we wouldn't need to go in with a wild oat herbicide. Again, that's where scouting is going to come important over the next little while here. We've definitely experienced some warmer days. We're seeing some wild oats starting to germinate and come through. Definitely go out there and check and see how bad it is, because we could see some issues later on in the growing season if wild oats escapes do happen in these areas. So just a couple things for winter wheat, and I guess the biggest one right now is to get out there and to scout the field and make sure that you know the crop stage to select the right herbicide, and then to make the decision on whether there's any wild oats that might be an issue over the next little while. Also, it's that time of year to start checking for insects and insect damage. We're already getting several reports of flea beetles being spotted throughout the southwest here. So if you have canola that's been in the ground for any period of time, definitely start scouting those fields to see if you're seeing any damage. You know, there's definitely some charts available to show what type of damage you need to be concerned about before you have to worry about control. But again, with the cool conditions, we've had canola germinating and coming up fairly slow. And if it is up already, then definitely need to be watching, because if it's been in the ground for any length of period of time, the insecticide that is on the seed starts day one once you put it in the ground. So keep an eye on that. That's something that's going to be an issue over the next week to 10 days. Also, while you're out there, start scouting for cutworms. There always seem to be hot spots where cutworms do some damage. And so if you see spots in the field where there is no canola, or your crop isn't coming up as uniform as it should be, get out there and start digging around and seeing if you can seeing any damage from cutworms. Again, they don't like it when it's too hot, so they'll get down into the soil, but you know, they do a lot of damage under cooler conditions. And you know, days like today, where it may not get as hot, they could be feeding for a longer period of times. So definitely get out there and just be scouting around to see if you see any damage from any of the insects. Again, make sure that the levels are high enough to warrant a spraying. Again, because when you do go out and do a spraying for a lot of the insects, we are getting a lot of the beneficial insects as well. So just keep that in mind when you're out there. They're having another weed seedling identification days, and there's 2 of them that are going to be happening in the province here. There's 2 different dates for the people in the Carmen area. It is on May the 22nd from 1 to 3:30, and it's going to be at the Ian Morrison Research Station. And then in Brandon, on the 29th of May, and it's going to be from 1 to 3 at the Assiniboine Community College on the North Hill campus. Both areas have pretty good displays for the different, or for the weeds that you'll be encountering out in the field. So anybody that is wanting to get a refresher, or is just wanting to get a better understanding of what some of the weeds are and how they grow and how they look at different stages, it would definitely be a good thing to go to. As we're getting into spraying season, I put this one up every week. It's available at all of the offices, the Field Crop Recommendation Guide. Dennis referred to it today when he was talking about different products that are safe on soybeans. The book is a good information source to have and to keep you up to date on what's out there for products. Our seasonal reports are still up and going, so the crop report is published every Tuesday, and then there's the insect and disease reports that John Gavlowski and Dave Kaminsky will be putting out. The weather updates are on our weather site, so all that information is there. Definitely go to it if you're needing information. And the Crop Chatter site is up and running as well. If you have questions, here's the Farm Production Extension people in the province. Like I always say, if they give these people a call, they definitely can give you a hand with any of your questions. And if they can't find the answer for you, they'll do their darndest to find it. And that wraps it up for this week. So join us next week, May the 22nd, for the next edition of Crop Talk.